Okay. So, funny story. I have done 70 episodes of the Breaking Labels podcast. And I definitely just did a live recording and didn't know until after it was done that I had not turned my mic on. Now, I just confirmed twice that my mic is on this time. So, I'm going to have to take down the other live recording. So, if you were trying to watch that when I was live on Facebook a half hour ago, fun. Didn't hear anything. There was no audio. 30 minutes of me just talking into the thin air. So, yeah. And it's a little funny and a little ironic because one, one of the things that I'm recording this podcast episode for was to announce that I'm starting another podcast. And if that doesn't make you feel confident about what is possible for you, my friend, you too. Oh, I got a thumbs up. Who gave me a thumbs up? I hope that means you can hear me this time. I don't know if that's Miss Teresa. I wish I had looked at the comments during the last live stream to find out that there was no audio. But yeah. So really, you too can start a podcast and not know how to turn on a mic. Dream big, people. Dream big. So let's try this all over again. So this episode, when it comes out on your favorite streaming app of choice, whether that is Apple Podcast, Spotify, Pandora, Google Podcast, Amazon. You can also listen to Amazon now. You will hear this episode next week. It'll be episode 71 of the Breaking Labels podcast. If you are watching right now, thank you. And this is a live recording of it. And I wanted to talk about two big things. And I have mentioned them a little bit in the last two episodes of Breaking Labels, but I wanted to do a full episode about them. I will start with a different perspective because that's coming up quick. That is a series I am doing on Breaking Labels at beginning the end of September. And a different perspective came out of this desire that I have had for a very, 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 very long time to talk about culture and race and ethnicity, but to do it in a way where people could ask questions that maybe they wouldn't typically feel comfortable asking, whether it's because they're worried that asking that question is going to make them sound racist or bigoted or ignorant, or they just don't know if even asking it is offensive. And I was starting to wonder, God, should I even do this series? Because I haven't gotten a ton of questions submitted yet. And I'll get to how you do that in a second. But I thought, you know what? I had very clear direction in a morning of prayer and meditation to do a promotion or a collaboration with this Instagram account called Mixed Chicks. I have followed the account for a long time. If you didn't know, I'm mixed. So yeah, I love following that account. They always have really fun posts. And I thought, well, let me see if they show the video that I created, the promotional video I created for a different perspective, like just what the feedback will be. Maybe people will be interested, maybe they won't. We'll see. This would be a great way to collaborate with someone who has a much bigger audience than I do, to see if there are other people out there in the ether that want to talk about these things like I have always wanted to talk about them. And so just so you know, like Mixed Chicks, typically, I guess the people who follow it are probably mixed chicks. And the response was overwhelming. There was a lot of, I can't wait for the series, but there was also a lot of, oh my God, I've always gotten those questions too. And also some other questions that I was like, oh. And the video that I created, you can see it on my Instagram. I think I even shared it on Facebook, but it's questions and comments that I've gotten over the years, and some more offensive than others. But what has struck me in recent years is I've noticed that I get a lot less questions. I hear a lot of statements, a lot of assumptions. I don't hear as many questions. And when people do ask, it is oftentimes in a very hushed, shameful tone, as in, I'm afraid to ask this because if I don't say it the right way, then maybe you're not going to like me, or I'm going to offend you, or it's not safe to ask it. And given that I've heard so many assumptions and so many statements over the years, some more offensive than others, like, oh, your dad must have had jungle fever. Um, just maybe it would be better if you let people think you're Hispanic as opposed to telling them you're half Black. That was a fun one. So hearing these statements over the years, I started to realize something. I may not like the way that you ask a question, but if you ask that question with a tone of curiosity, then I at least know there is an opportunity for conversation and connection. Whereas when you just make a statement to me about what you assume about me or my parents or their sexual preferences, because that's what jungle fever is about, there's not a lot of room for a full discussion. There's not a lot of room for connection. So even if you don't know how to ask the question, for me personally, I would rather you ask it in a potentially offensive way if your intent really is to have a conversation. Now, that's my perspective. I know that there are other people who will say, don't ask a question if you don't know how to ask it. That's fair. I'm not saying that approach is wrong, but I wanted to do a different perspective because I wanted to create a space where people could ask the question without fear of somebody's going to know I asked this. Somebody's going to judge me for the way I asked this. Somebody's going to judge me for not knowing the answer to this already. And I didn't create, I'm using a company called Custom Insight, and there is a special link that is going to be in the comments of this post if you're watching it on YouTube or Facebook Live. That's a fly that just went across my camera. But there will be a link where you can submit your question or scenario anonymously. And I say scenario because I did actually have a really good conversation over DM with someone about it, where they were saying, I asked somebody this question at work. I kind of got like stiff-armed. They didn't want to talk about it. What did I do wrong? What did I say? Or what could I have said differently? And I think that is as valuable a situation or scenario to be discussed as a question, because we are never, as a society, going to get to a point where we have empathy and understanding if we don't first have discussion and if we don't first share experiences and ask about those experiences. So a different perspective is an opportunity to do that. Now, I had toyed with a long time with, well, should I have a whole podcast about race? And here's the thing. I think this is an important discussion to have, but I also am very well aware that there are a lot of other podcasts that are diving into them much more deeply, and I think are great resources for people. So in all honesty, a different perspective is just to open that door for you. It is just to pique your interest. It is maybe you'll get your question answered and you'll be good and you want to just go on your merry way. Or maybe you'll think, oh man, the more I know, the more I realize I don't know. And I want to dive deeper. And there will be recommendations for other podcasts you can listen to. Heck, I'll give you a recommendation for one right now. It's called The Kinswomen. And it is a white host and a Black host who discuss race and talk about like different issues and how it impacts people or privilege, and really great discussion from two women. And if you want to dive in deep now before the Breaking Labels series, A Different Perspective, starts, that's a great place to start. But I do understand that the whole point of this is if you're just at a point where you have a question that you're curious about, maybe you're not ready to listen to a whole podcast about it, but maybe you'll listen to a 2 or 3 part series about it. So that's a different perspective. And the other announcement, which I alluded to in the most recent episodes of Breaking Labels, is that I am also launching a whole other podcast called Her Time. And Her Time is actually inspired by a few things, but one of them is a poem of the same name by Lang Lev. I don't want to butcher it. I don't know how to pronounce her last name in all honesty. But I'll read you the poem and then we'll go into why this is going to be its own podcast separate from Breaking Labels. Okay. Her Time. She has been feeling it for a while, that sense of awakening. There is a gentle rage simmering inside her, and it is getting stronger by the day. She will hold it close to her. She will nurture it and let it grow. She won't let anyone take it away from her. It is her rocket fuel, and finally she is going places. She can feel it down to her very core. This is her time. She will not only climb mountains, she will move them too. That poem has been the background of my Facebook for a long time. I talked about in the very first episode of the Breaking Labels podcast when I told my story of feeling like I was just only ever meant to be the pretty girl's sidekick. And I have felt that gentle rage simmering. And I started to notice that the conversations that I was, well, not the conversations, but a lot of conversations that I was drawn to and people I was drawn to have on the Breaking Labels podcast were women who in one form or another had answered that gentle rage, had felt that yearning for something more in their lives, whether they could vocalize it, whether they knew how to describe it, they just knew they wanted more. And for some, like Rashonda Pratt, like there was this burning bush moment where she was held at gunpoint. But it is not always that dramatic for us. For one of the women whose conversation is going to be one of the first ones that you hear on her time is Angela Masinick, who has a program about how to stop over drinking. But she didn't leave her corporate job to start that program. She left her corporate job because she just decided, I'm done with this. Like, I don't know what I want, but this ain't it, and I want more. Well, she didn't say ain't. I used ain't. She did not use that word. But anyway, the point is she felt that urge. She felt that nudge, and she followed it. And I think there is something really amazing about having an entire podcast with those stories. With stories of women, because it is only going to be interviews with women who have forged their own paths in some way, whether it's a path about their career, whether it was a path about their family, their whole being, their spirituality. It is kind of like the breadcrumbs in was that Hansel and Gretel? Who are the ones that got lost and they left breadcrumbs? I think it was Hansel and Gretel. I don't know. I'll have to look that up. But if you ever heard that story, there were breadcrumbs that they left to find their way out of the forest, right? Well, her time are going to be the breadcrumbs and the inspiration for women that I know have that same yearning, who have that same feeling and this thought that there's something. I don't know what, but there's something. And getting to hear what were the signs for other people, I hope will help the listener find out what the signs are for her. And one of the ones that I thought about when I was thinking about, starting her time and what kind of conversations it's going to be focused on and the types of stories that I want to tell and I want my guests to share was all the times that I beat myself up for not fitting into a box that I was never meant to be in the first place. Whether that box was my role in a relationship, in a friendship, whether that box was my job. Knowing that there was something that was off, something that felt not quite right, but I wanted to be the best at that role because I was operating out of a sense of lack. I was trying to prove my worth in a place that I never needed to prove my worth. One, because I'm already worthy, but two, that wasn't where I was supposed to be. And we know that. We have that deep sense of knowing, but sometimes we're so accustomed to ignoring it and not allowing ourselves time and silence to listen that it's easy to just ignore it and to busy ourselves with everything else. And I've talked about this before. I will figure out what my purpose is and what I should be doing once I get to this level. Once I hit this goal, once I hit this quota, then I'll work on that stuff for me. That'll come. But I have to prove myself here first, because if I don't prove myself here, then I'm not qualified to do what I'm called to do. It's backwards. I had it completely backwards. I should have been working on what I was called to do, because that's what I needed to not be qualified, but become qualified in. Like, that was it all along. But I was so focused on getting, being seen and heard in places that I was never meant to be in. I was so focused on being seen and heard by dating prospects who I was never meant to be with. Why do I want to be seen and heard by somebody who doesn't text and doesn't show up consistently? Like, what am I, it was never about them, right? It was about me. And I see that so often in women especially. And I wanted a podcast that just focused on those conversations. So that's what Her Time is going to be as compared to Breaking Labels. Now, I want you to understand, Breaking Labels isn't going away. I'm just changing the format. So Breaking Labels is now going to be a series-only podcast, or at least for now. This might change in a year. I don't know. But for now, in order to conserve my capacity, i.e., to be able to do this for 2 podcasts in the way that I want to and in a way that will serve the listeners, Breaking Labels will focus on specific series at a time. So we're doing a series on race called A Different Perspective, where I'm going to do an entire series again on mental health and mental illness. I'll do another series on trauma. I'll do another series on addiction. And, it'll be 4 or 5 episodes, however many it will be for each series. And then there'll be a little break until the next series, until I can get those interviews lined up and taken care of and edited and ready for you to go, and ready to go for you, the listener. So I have 2 asks for you if you're watching this and if you're listening to this, is what series would you like to hear on Breaking Labels that I have not done, or maybe I've done an episode or talked to somebody about, but you want to hear more of? And 2, if you plan on listening to Her Time, who are you, do you want to hear from? Who is someone that you admire and that has gone through whatever trials and tribulations that you respect and admire about them, and you want to hear more of their story? Who do you want to hear from? Because I cannot wait to have them on Her Time, and I want to know what you want to hear more of, or want to hear of once Her Time begins. So those are the 2 big announcements. And also, what I wanted to let you know is, I'm so nervous to even say this. Even when I did this false recording, this false start, and nobody heard this because my mic wasn't on, I was so nervous to say it then too. So I have signed up on a crowdfunding platform called GoFundHer. Actually, I will be having the founder of that on the Her Time podcast as well. But I'm itching. But I started it, and I started a page, one for A Different Perspective and another page to launch Her Time. There's a fundraising goal for each page. And whether you donate $1 or whether you're a company who wants to support and be a sponsor and donate $500, whichever, it doesn't matter. I appreciate it. But understand, it is not a paycheck for me. This is to help pay for the production cost of now starting to have 2 podcasts, and also the advertising costs. Because as I'm learning, and as I learned from doing that collaboration with Mixed Chicks, I am so grateful for my audience and the people who follow me, who listen to this podcast. But if I want to have tremendous impact and to get these podcasts and these stories out to as many people as possible, it would be really helpful to do paid advertising, which means doing a sponsored ad on Facebook or Instagram, or advertising on another podcast. So you, as the listener, you don't have to contribute at all. I will put a link to both GoFundHer pages in the comments of this live and in the show notes of the episode if you're listening that way. And like I said, whether it's $1, $5, or $500, I appreciate it. And I also want you to know, as a listener, I appreciate the fact that you show up every week. Or if this is your first time that you're listening to it at this point, that's huge. And to everybody who has ever shared an episode, shared a post I've created, written a review, or even if somebody who's just messaged me and said that you listen to the podcast, thank you. It's going to make me cry. I appreciate that more than you could ever know. And to have people see you and be able to tell how much you love doing something you're doing and that they appreciate it and enjoy it as well, it's pretty big. If I could give this to anybody who is struggling to figure out what their purpose is or what to do next in their life or what they're supposed to be doing that would actually feel fulfilling, I would gift this to you. And I hope that doing the Her Time podcast will do that for people, because everybody deserves to know that what they're doing is what they're supposed to be doing and that it matters. It's the most amazing feeling in the world. I don't know what else to say about that. So I hope that if you enjoy the Breaking Labels podcast, you will also enjoy Her Time. I appreciate anybody who gives me any feedback on the conversations you want to hear. And again, I'll say it again. If you have a question or scenario that you want discussed during the A Different Perspective series for Breaking Labels, please, please, please use the link in the comments. You can submit it completely anonymously. I will not know who's submitting the question or scenario, but I would love to hear from you. And I am so excited to have guests on to have these discussions that I know need to be had. So with that, thank you and have a great rest of your week. Doot, doot, doot.